a turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance.
Oh, my goodness.
Two on the clock.
Alrighty, guys, and welcome back to the Basketball Fix podcast. Now, on today's episode, we're going to be touching on NBL Supercoach. And geez, Jez, we are looking forward to it today. Now, before we jump into today's episode, I want to give a quick shout out to our socials. Now, go check us out on Instagram, The Basketball Fix Podcast, and check out our website as well, www.thebasketballfix.com. We obviously keep up to date with all the biggest news topics and things going on in the NBL world. And going forward, we'll be touching on the NBL Supercoach world. Quick little shout out as well. We are running an open league on NBL Supercoach, the Basketball Fix community, we've called it. If you want to check out that league, make sure you go onto the league section, join the league. The league code is 529777. Now, I am only here with Jez today on this episode. And Jez, I want to listen to what you've been up to, mate, and also some of your experiences in NBL Supercoach. Have you played AFL Supercoach, NRL, and obviously this is your first NBL Supercoach experience. So welcome back, mate.
Thanks, buddy. I am so pumped for this. It is my first year playing NBL Supercoach, but have been an absolute diehard NRL Supercoach player. Have just lost the final last weekend in my league. Threw it all away. Everyone I touched got injured or got benched or got sent off or whatever. So, absolute diehard Supercoach fan. Love it. It really is a really great way to get into the league even deeper than we already do. And a big sort of, I don't know, not a shout out, but just to let you all know, Ryan was too much of a pussy to come up against us in Supercoach this year. So he's just going to be producing the show instead. So, Ryan, well, you can learn from the best this season, and we will see you next year in NBL Supercoach, where you can come up against at least one of the top two in the whole league, I would presume, between me and Josh. We'll see whose tactic actually wins this season in NBL25 Supercoach. But yeah, super excited. But Josh, I don't know, probably the biggest thing for me, there's a lot of different rules if you're an NBL Supercoach player to NRL and AFL. Do you want to give us just a quick rundown of those sort of big differences and how it works? Because, for me, I'll probably learn something even now, even though there's a lot of information on there. Let us know what the rules are and sort of that big difference in the rules.
Yeah, definitely. Before we get into that, I just want to give a quick shout out to myself. Finished 116th last season for NBL Supercoach, so had to throw that in there as well. Obviously, I had about 26,000 people last year, but I think realistically, we're going to see a massive jump in, obviously, people joining NBL Supercoach in its second season. So I think we'll be looking at more of the 40 to 50,000 people mark, and that's going to be great because it's only going to become a bigger community going forward, and I'm looking forward to obviously having more people to compete with at the top of it all as well, like Jez will be as well. But
So yes, you'll end up 117th this season, right? Because you won't be 116th anymore. So I'll be way at the top end.
Yeah, I hope not. I want to be right down to those single digits this year, mate. But what is NBL Supercoach is the big thing, I guess, on everyone's mind, and especially the guys that are new like yourself, Jez. And I think the best way to describe NBL Supercoach is going through a couple of, I guess, the information that we are needing for NBL Supercoach. So each person will start with $2 million as a salary cap to pick 10 players. Now you'll have 5 starters and 5 players on the bench. The starting players will score full points for your particular team. So if a player scores 40, you'll get 40 points for that player on that week. You'll have 5 bench players though, and their scores will be halved each game. So if you've got a guy on the bench who scores 20, you will see 10 points of that go towards your total for that round.
Mate. That's why you're at the top.
I had to use a very easy calculation there, mate, otherwise I would have cooked it. Now, the thing is, I guess the most important part to note is the point system and how you do get points. So 1 point of Supercoach points, I guess you could say, will be awarded per point that the player does score in a game. You'll also get 1 point per rebound. You'll also get 2 points for every assist, 3 points for every block, 3 points for every steal. You will lose 2 points if your player turns the ball over, And as a little bit of a cheeky award for, I guess, the centers and maybe even some of the top playmakers in the league as well, if your player ends with a triple-double, you will get 5 additional points added on. And if you get a triple-double, you will get 10 points added on to your end score after the game has completed. So you look at a guy like Trey Kell last season, I think he had 69 fantasy points in a game against Illawarra where he had a massive triple-double. That is a huge score. There's players in NBL Supercoach who will struggle on a double game week to have 69 points, let alone in one game. Now, Jeremy, I want to get your thoughts on this because coming into, I guess, the NBL world, it's a little bit of a different one. And you heard me just touch on it there, obviously single game weeks and double game weeks. Can you give the listeners a little bit of an insight into that? Because I guess first-time NBL Supercoach players, this is very, very weird, I guess, for some players to hear.
Yeah, it is probably the biggest difference. If like a lot of people that are coming into NBL Supercoach have probably played NRL or AFL Supercoach before, and this is probably the thing that we struggle with the most. I remember when we talked about doing this and getting into Supercoach and diving in deep, and we put our first team together. My first team was obviously completely different to what it is now, but it was based around sort of not even really taking into account how big these double game weeks are. So because you get obviously a certain amount of trades in maybe NRL, AFL Supercoach, you don't get 2 trades per round. It's a little bit less. But in NBL Supercoach, because of these double game weeks, I presume that's why you get 44 trades, which is 2 trades per round, and then 4 boosts where you can have 3 trades in a round. So it obviously works out to be 44 trades per year. So that's an important factor to think that, okay, you can actually make trades every single round. And then it's also, these double game weeks, how you have to plan your team, because obviously there's big patches. And like Josh dropped at the start of the show, we'll have you could probably say Josh's all hard work that he's put together with a table of the different runs where teams have maybe string together, say 3 or 4 weeks where they have double game weeks. Obviously, that's really important because you want to load up with those players that are going to go on these longer runs. So you don't have to make trades because they should, by default, get higher scores than someone, obviously, that's playing just one game. So because even if they have an average game, they're still going to have 2 average games, you're going to score higher than somebody that's having a single game week. So yeah, I think that is obviously the biggest difference, and it is what makes it extremely challenging, especially starting up, as we'll go into our next segment when we talk about cash cows. I think in NRL and AFL, the first thing you do is obviously load up your whole bench with cash cows because they're not playing, or say 4 of them in NRL will play. So where here you can't really do that, or I think this is where the art of probably finishing in the top 116 to finishing all the way down the bottom, or, mid-pack, is going to be finding that balance between maybe players that are going to be scoring points or finding your cash cows that are going to make you money so you can load up and obviously have the best 10 players at the end of the year on your team. Because if you're not constantly making money throughout the year, you're not going to be able to have that strong team in the final run. And it's extremely important because there's so many double game weeks at the end of the season. So it almost doesn't really matter who you really have there in the end. You just want people with good matchups where you can make straight across trades, but you're going to have the cash there to obviously load up with, say, the top 10, 15 players in the league. So I think that's the biggest challenge for me coming in as a diehard NRL, AFL Supercoach player to NBL, is following these double game weeks and the strategies by having bench scoring players. So, but Josh, what are the tactics, say for you that did it last year and finished so high up? What was it that you look for now at the start of the season? Maybe the mistakes you made at the start of the year that you fixed by the end of the year. What are those tips for some of these crossover Supercoach players, and what should, say, someone like myself be looking at the start of the year and really focusing on in regards to those 2 big factors in NBL Supercoach?
Yeah, you definitely got to, I guess, focus on really nailing, I think, those bench spots, because that's the most important thing, I think, personally. nailed them very early on in my season. And you've really got to look at the preseason games and obviously the blitz games coming up as well to be able to really, get that sort of. I've got a pool right now of about 25 players who I want to get on my bench at some sort of, stage this off season. But then it's nailing down those players as to what's their role, how many minutes they're going to play. Are they actually going to be a chance of maybe double doubles? Are they going to be double digit scorers? What are they going to do realistically to give you points per game? So it's a really, really good point with the bench because it is quite a scary tactic in a way. But I think that is the reason why I finished so high. So, last season was because I nailed my bench players to be able to give myself enough cash at the end of the season to start bringing in your Bryce Cottons, your Parker Jackson Cartwrights, your Gary Clarks last season, who guys were really, really scoring massive sort of statistics last year. But I want to briefly touch on the schedulizer quickly because when you look at the schedulizer, you'll see three different colors. You'll see red, you'll see orange, and you'll see green. Now, green represents a double game week. That is what you really want. You want that. That's a go week if you're looking at it. The orange weeks are orange number ones. Now, they're weeks in which they've got a single game week that week, but they're coming into either a double game week the next week or a run of double games as well. And then the red, obviously, is the ones that you want to avoid. So you don't want to have too many, single game weeks in a row up until a double game week. But you've obviously got to, really assess, is this player going to make cash for me? Is he going to score well? All those sort of things as well, which we're going to touch on very soon. But yeah, Jez, what are some of your other thoughts, mate?
Yeah, well, I just want to know, probably the biggest question I have is how do you look when you're talking about having your cash cows, which we'll get into our selections very soon, when you've got your cash cows, and then how do you find that balance between are you looking at having, say, some players that are actually scoring on your bench? Like, say, you could have a gun, you could have a top range player on your bench because, hey, they usually score, say, 25 points. You're going to get 12 and a half from them every week, which is maybe more than what your cash cows are doing. Are you looking to sort of balance with some good scoring players on your bench, or are you just doing your 5 players, say early in the season, we talk about now, 5 sort of players that are just going to be earning you money?
I've gone with currently, and which we'll touch on our teams a little bit later as well. So if you guys stick around for that as well, we'll announce our first preseason teams. But I've gone with 4 guys who are going to make me cash, in my opinion, and then 1 guy who I see as a bit of a triple-double threat as well. So I don't think you should go for, on your bench personally, an all-out scorer. I think you've got to go for a guy that may average, let's just say 10 points and maybe 7 or 8 rebounds and 6 or 7 assists. I think they're the sort of molded guy that you've really got to look at because, we've all seen with scorers, yes, one day they might score 25, but then they can also go for a game where they score 5. And if they don't do anything else right, then realistically the Supercoach points drop dramatically. So you've got to find all-around great talent and exciting players to really fill those bench spots up. Because if you don't, you can be sort of restricted in terms of how, how high they're going to score from round to round. But a very good question there. And I think a lot of those questions that you've started to ask, they'll be answered very soon when we touch on, obviously, some of these players. And then, obviously, when we go into our teams, because we will give somewhat of a bit of a description as to why we've picked these players, whether it's schedule, whether it's we might be seeing an increase in, obviously, what they're going to do in NBL25. But it's going to be very exciting to announce our teams first for NBL25 Supercoach. Now, we've touched on it a few times here, cash cows. So what is a cash cow? So a cash cow is a guy who realistically starts at a very low sort of base. So the basement price for an NBL Supercoach player is $58,500, I should say as well. So they're a guy that may be a bottom ender who's going to make you, let's just say, $100,000 to $200,000 in an NBL season. So last year, I look at a guy like Jalen Galloway. He was a $71,000 option for me last year. By the time I traded him out, he was worth $285,000. So I'd made just over $200K on one player from the start of the season in about 5 rounds as well. So this is what I mean when we're touching on guys who are going to make cash. It doesn't necessarily have to be in 5 weeks. It can be in 6 to 7 to 10 weeks. But it's realistically, I guess, setting yourself up for the end of the season to be able to target the guys like Bryce Cotton, the guys like Parker Jackson Cartwright, those top-ended talented players in the NBL. But Jeremy, give us a couple of the names that you've been looking at from a cash cow perspective, mate, because there are quite a few on that list. And like I mentioned, I've got about, roughly 20 to 25 names that I'm looking at and I'm going to be looking at very closely in these preseason games.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like this is probably the toughest part of it for me coming into this season is like there is so many players, but then you've got to bring into this whole thing. I think we discussed a guy that isn't probably in my team at the moment, but or is actually, but I don't really know if he's going to stay there. Is a guy like Rocco Zikarsky, because he's obviously going to be a player. He's going to improve. He should see increased minutes and he should be scoring some points, but his schedule is extremely bad at the start of the year without any double game weeks. So I think it makes it tough. Like I found that is the biggest problem, is this timing of getting in. When is it worth bringing in Rocco now? Because he's still going to increase, obviously, but he's not going to have that massive hit. And then it's okay, well, if he doesn't start playing double game weeks, maybe his price has already gradually gone up to the price that it's going to be, but without that sort of instant influx that you can get with some cash cows. Like you said with Galloway, it was a 5-week span, and that's obviously based on him maybe having a couple of double game weeks in there. But where Rocco's not going to get that. So I can't remember exactly, but it's like what, round 10 or something, round 8? Is there
round 9's their first double game week?
Yeah, there you go, 10-8. I was smack bang. But it's like that, it's like that. It's obviously, being a new player, you don't sort of know how these increases happen. And like, is it worth having Rocco in there so you save a trade, or that's just locked in? Okay, well, I'm going to start trading him out maybe by then because he's already going to come up to that price. Or are we looking for guys that are going to go bang, make your money, and then you get them out? So I don't know. My sort of big pick when it comes to a cash cow is, if you've listened to our show about our NBL predictions and stuff, a guy that I'm going to rate very, very highly and could be the rookie of the year or next gen player of the year is Elijah Pepper. I think he's 69,000 starting price. I think he's going to play a pretty good role. He should see some pretty good minutes, and he's been an absolute fire in preseason so far with 2 games over 20 points. He's been getting rebounds as well, a couple of assists, a couple of a steal in there, I think. I think definitely Pepper is a big cash cow for me but it is this, it's sort of that problem that you get where you're working out, okay, well, how many minutes is he going to get? Because you've also got Henshaw that's going to be a potential cash cow as well in Perth. And it's going to be interesting to see how many minutes he actually gets. So, Pepper is definitely there. And then I've been looking to a guy an early cash cow that I brought into my team is Nick Marshall. Had a massive NBL 1 season for Mount Gambier in the NBL 1 South. He had 23 points, 8 rebounds, so has that sort of all-round feel to him. He potentially could see a whole lot of minutes, could possibly even push to start in Adelaide. And the Adelaide 36ers have that key early double round, if I'm looking at it, rounds 3 and 4. So he might be a sell straight after round 4. I think I will start with, at the moment, I have Marshall, in my team, but you'll be looking to sell straight after, like, depending on how the projection of his price rise goes and how big he scores. He could be definitely a guy that disappears in round 5, or maybe you have to wait to round 6 until that projection goes. So, they're my 2 sort of locks at the moment. At the moment, we say at the moment because the amount of times we're going to fiddle with our teams between the next sort of 2 weeks is going to be grotesque. But definitely, I think starting with those 2 guys in my team from the get-go. Josh, what are your 2 picks, man?
Yeah, my 2 locks right now, one is Lachlan Aldrich. So he comes into this season as a $121.4 thousand player, a really nice price. Now, there's obviously been a lot of questions, and I think they'll be answered very quickly in this NBL season. Is he going to be the starting power forward for the Illawarra Hawks, or are they going to bring in an import 4 to be able to take his role? Now, I think personally, even if they do come in and take his role as the starter, he's still going to be very, very solid as a bench backup power forward or even a center as well. He was in the MVP, obviously over there in the NBL, put up terrific stats. Now, the only query I have got is obviously that and the fact that he showed a lot last season, but would tend to turn the ball over sometimes in games quite a lot, and would also get into foul trouble in games very early as well. We wouldn't see him come back onto the court. So that is a bit of a flag there for him, but I just think his primed for a massive season here. I think everything that Justin Tatum said about him, it sounds like he's going to have the starting role locked up to start the year. His preseason game already was incredible. I just think he's going to have a big season. And the other one is a guy that you mentioned briefly there as well when you were touching on some Perth Wildcats players, 69K as well, Ben Henschel. So I just think when we look at a guy who is primed to take that next step in the NBL world, it's Ben Henschel. Now, past NBL Supercoach players will be with me in the fact that luckily I escaped this, but a lot of people brought Ben Henschel in after a massive game. I think he had 24 points, 5 rebounds, 6 assists, something along those stat lines. They all brought him in. He then didn't play for the next 4 games and didn't even get any cash increase from that. So people were copping zeros, and obviously they couldn't make the cash on him because one thing which we forgot to mention at the start of the episode is you won't see a price rise until those players have played their first 3 games. Now, after that point, they will start to increase by the round. So if a player plays 2 games, they're obviously going to have an increase of 2 games, but you can't make any cash on a player until they've played 3 games. So that's obviously what happened with Ben Henschel. He'd only had played 2 games up until that point when he dominated. So he hadn't played the 3rd game to be able to get the cash rise just yet. But he's a guy coming in who's got a really increased role, I think, for the Perth Wildcats. You can throw, like you mentioned, Elijah Pepper. You can even throw Michael Harris in there as well as another 69K option for the Perth Wildcats this upcoming season. So a lot of cash cows for them. Some other guys that you guys could look at definitely. I've written down a couple. I'll briefly go through just a couple of them. The number one guy I think who is looking at a cash cow, a lot of people are excited about, but obviously the schedule is, I guess, holding people back, is Casey Prather. Comes into this season as a 139.2k player. Owen Foxwell is another one for me that's been in and out of my team. Currently plays for Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. Has got an increased role for sure. With obviously Derek Walton Jr. and Nathan Sobey coming in. He looks like he's primed to be the backup shooting guard, point guard for Southeast Melbourne. He comes in at 98k. And one more player that I want to touch on is Jackson McCoy. Now, he's going to miss his first couple of rounds with a suspension for DUI, but he's a 58.5k player for the Cairns Taipans who comes in off an impressive Olympic campaign for South Sudan as well. It sounds like from what Adam Ford has said, he will be the backup point guard for Taron Armstrong on the Cairns Taipans roster. So that is a major lock. Now, obviously, it is frustrating him coming with obviously the baggage of missing the first 2 rounds. But it comes at a perfect time because in rounds 3 and 4, they have double game weeks. So massive thing for obviously Jackson McCoy. I think he's going to be a lock in my team, especially at that point. But they're just a couple of the cash cows that we wanted to mention. Now, the next sort of players that you can touch on, now you've got obviously the cash cows, which is touched on, is the mid-price players. Now, I don't know what you currently see the mid-prices sort of at, Jez, but mid-prices for myself personally are looking between the 150 to 250 sort of range. You can go a little bit over that as well. Most of the imports are set at 277k. So, I think for this point, we'll make it that is the sort of top end range of the mid-range price players. But I'm going to go first here and touch on a few of the guys that I'm excited to see in NBL 25 in terms of, these middle guys. Now, the first one, again, is a player who plays for the Brisbane Bullets, who I picked to win the most improved trophy, and that's Tyrell Harrison. Now, he comes into this season priced at 237.8k for the Brisbane Bullets. I think he's going to have an increased role. When we're touching on, obviously, preseason form, this is a guy who's been flirting with that 20 and 10 sort of form for his first 3 preseason games, in which they've won all 3, and he's been probably, I guess, the most influential player on the court for the Brisbane Bullets. I just think he's primed for a massive NBL 25 season. But again, it all comes back to the schedulizer. So he's only going to play, 9 games in the first 9 rounds. So whereas some other teams are going to play, between 12 and 13 in those couple of rounds. So, you're losing 3 games worth of points, especially early on in the season. It's very hard to make up those points because most of these top players are going to make cash as well as points early on in the season. So it's hard to obviously be making up points as well as trying to make up cash to be able to catch these guys as well, because there's only so many players in the NBL to pick from. So it's really, really important that you nail these cash cows and really follow this schedulizer as well that we've got up there, because that's going to be the biggest thing that we harp on all season. It's not about what's coming up in this round. It's looking ahead to 3 or 4 weeks. So it's going to be interesting. But the other one that I've got is a player who probably is only in here and me touching on purely based around the schedulizer, and that's Melbourne United big man Marcus Lee. So he comes back to Melbourne United after a season with the Jack Jumpers where he won an NBL championship. He sits currently priced at $204,000. So when we're touching on a guy who's going to, produce some really good scores early on, you look at Melbourne United's schedule to start the year. They play one game in round one, which every team does. They then play two games, one game, and then have 3 double round weeks as well. So I'm pretty sure after round 10, they would have played 15 games. So they're the most played team at the start of the NBL season. And, I think it's really important to have a couple of these Melbourne United players. But, Jez, who are some of the mid-range priced players that you're looking at for your team currently?
Yeah, see, I already see how smart you are in this whole super coach thing, because I've straight up into my mid ranges. I went straight to the top end, and maybe that's probably like if I was doing it in NRL, I always take a very, very similar tactic to what you do and pick some of these lower range lower priced mid range players, because you get some decent points, and then you can obviously see the growth and make some cash from them as well. Where sort of I went straight into some guys that I wanted in my starting lineup that I thought, okay, well, I'll get a good start to the season and try and max out on points early to start the season well, and went for your boy, your number one, the love of your life, Space Cam Oliver at 277 dollars, you could say, Supercoach dollars. Because he's obviously going to be an absolute monster. You see that he's going to pull points from everywhere in every aspect. I think you're going to get some blocks, you're going to get some points, you're going to get some rebounds. He was busting out some pretty nice passes in those preseason games as well. So you're going to rack up some assists there, because he was playing sort of. I thought obviously that he was going to be playing down low the whole way, but he likes to play up high, likes to shoot the threes, likes to put some cheeky passes in as well and get some assists. So he's going to be a guy that I think is definitely going to produce, and maybe he's going to end up at the top range probably, and maybe likely make you $100,000 or pretty close there too anyway. But he's a guy that you'll probably have in your team besides the quiet patch of Sydney doubles. You're going to have in your team probably for the most part of the season, especially at the start, I think, because Sydney also have a pretty kind schedule where you want to have Sydney players in there, where they've got a double game week in round 2, a double game week in round 4, and then they have 2 double game weeks in 6 and 7. So he could be a guy that's definitely in there until that period. So it'll be really, really interesting to see, how much money he can make, and if he can produce and make you a little bit of cash, so you can maybe do a pretty decent sideways swap in the blank part of their schedule. But then, I've also gone for another guy that I sort of just found, to be honest, this morning when I was doing a little bit more research for this pod, was a guy by the name of Matt Hurt, who plays for Southeast Melbourne. He was signed sort of, at the back end of the preseason a few weeks ago, and his numbers were extremely decent in the G League last year, where he averaged 20 points and 8 rebounds, and he comes in to Southeast Melbourne that are obviously going to, I don't know. I don't think anybody really knows how Southeast Melbourne are going to go this season. I think a lot of people rank them very, very low and are probably going to be a bottom 2 team. But they have brought in some decent talent, and they've basically done a full rebuild there. So I think you've got to sort of see where he fits in. And he's going to be playing obviously with a couple of guys that do like to score in Nathan Sobey and Walton Jr. So that's the only concern for me. Right now, I don't have him in my team, but it was a player that sort of really surprised me, and sort of being down a little bit at the bottom end, closer to the bottom end of the mid-range, those mid-range players. So, but the concern for me, it might be a player that I look to bring in when they have a bit of a kind of schedule, and you can get a bit of a feel how the Phoenix offense is going to run and how much ball he's going to see. But, so he's definitely a player that is on my radar as a mid-ranger.
No, definitely. And obviously touching on Matt Hurt, if you look at their schedule, it's probably a good sort of thing to look ahead to round 6, 7, and 8, where they have back to back to back sort of double game weeks as well. So you're going to get 5 rounds of data, I guess, to look at before you bring him in.
Yeah.
And if he's as great as what Jez is touching on, it's going to be really exciting for the league and obviously for Supercoach as well. But a couple of other guys that I've been looking at in terms of these mid-price madness players that we're going to touch on. Jonah Bolden's another one for me. He heads over to the New Zealand Breakers with a bit of a backup centre role, I think, personally, or maybe even a scoring power forward. It's going to be really interesting to see what his role will be in NBL 25. So he currently sits at $245.5 thousand. You've obviously got Bull Qual as well, who's shout out to Ryan. He's one of his favourites coming into NBL 25. He sits at $232.4 thousand. And the last one that I want to touch on is a guy who has been very interesting for me to start the year. And again, it sucks that he plays for Brisbane, but that's Deng Adel. Now, he's been really impressive in these preseason games. He's had a couple of games over 20 points. He currently sits at price-wise of $232,000 for this up-and-coming NBL Supercoach season. So he's going to be a massive watch for me, especially when we sort to, attack those double game weeks. Because if you look at their schedule, the Brisbane Bullets players are going to be very, very attractive from rounds 11 all the way to round 18, where they only play double game weeks as well. So, yes, it's a sucky start to the NBL season for the Bullets, but in terms of obviously capitalizing on major, major points, they're a team that you're going to be looking at. So these guys like Prather, these guys like Harrison, Rocco Zakarski, yes, you may not make the points or the cash, I should say, early on in the season with these guys, but they're going to be guys, especially late in the year, that you're going to look to target and bring in as well. So there are a couple of other guys to think on.
Sorry, I think it's a really good thing Supercoach wise that they have this long period at the start, because they're also one of these teams that are pretty unknown and don't really know how the team dynamics actually going to work to start the year. So not having that, it'd be worse if they had double game week to start, because you're like, shit, I got to make some calls on, I got to bring some of these guys in because they're going to get double game weeks. At least now we have sort of time, same with Southeast Melbourne, you have some time, get your feelers out, sort of see how they're actually going to run, who's going to get the minutes, who's performing, who's not, who are these imports they've brought in that, are either bust or bang or bust when it comes to Supercoach and even as players moving to the NBL. So I'm glad that Brisbane have this, really, really soft start. So I think I think we're lucky in that aspect.
No, definitely. And obviously the last sort of category, I guess you can call them, is the top prices. Now, I'm going to start with you here, Jez, because I've got my boy.
I'm just changing my team right now. So if you see me looking down, those that are watching on YouTube, I'm meddling with my team as we speak.
That's what we want, and we hope all you guys listening to this podcast right now are doing the exact same thing. But one of the top prices that you've been looking towards, I guess, for this upcoming NBL Supercoach season.
Yeah, this is also so tough, and you got to look at the schedule. I think when it comes to these guns, you've got to have a few of them in your team to start the year, and it's got to be pretty schedule based. So I've been trying to work out, all right, who, I don't know, like who I should have to start the year, who I want that are going to be really, really good at the beginning of the year. And I think for me, probably my only lock at the moment is Jalen Adams. I think he's going to get have a massive start to the year. I think he's going to get a lot of space having Cam Oliver there. I think you're going to see where he maybe got put under pressure a lot and had sort of these up and down games. I think with Sydney having so many, such a talented team, they're going to be very hard to defend, and he's going to be very hard to double, where I think it was pretty easy that he was doubled early last year or throughout the whole season. So I think this year to start the season with them having a pretty kind double game week start, he could be a lock that's in my team, until they start to have a little bit of a quiet period after maybe round 7 to 10 or somewhere like that, where they start losing out on these doubles. So I think he's definitely a lock because he should be scoring points straight off from game one, having that little bit of extra space. And then another guy, go to the pool of jack jumpers, where I think at the start of the year, I'm not going to have Milton Doyle in my team purely because of the jack jumpers schedule. If I pull it up now, your fantastic tracker, they start getting really, really interesting, the jack jumpers, around round 5, where you probably got to start to have a couple of them in your team where they go double game week round 5, single game week round 6, and then they have 2 double game weeks in 7 and 8. So I think you've got to start bringing them in. I think it's for a similar reason. The jack jumpers have brought in Craig Sword, and that should free up Doyle. Doyle was a offensive producer last year and was, I think, a top 5 player when it comes to average score in Supercoach. Correct me if I'm wrong there, Josh, but he was definitely high up there. But now he should get a bit more freedom. I think we should see Sword play, probably be their 6th man, depending on how they start with Jordan Crawford, and could even start some games. So I think he's going to be their key defender, which should make Milton Doyle a much more offensive threat than he already was for the jack jumpers. So by him not having to think so defensively, I think he can focus a little bit more and be the actual center of their offense. So I'm expecting him to score a little bit more and maybe have a higher average when it comes to scoring points. And then obviously what he does with assists and rebounds there is a plus for Milton Doyle. What are you looking at, Josh? Who are your biggest guns? And I know you're definitely going to say the best, the cream of the crop, the MVP of the league, and your love of your life, your other love of your life besides Cam Oliver, Bryce Cotton, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think, when you look at the schedulizer, it doesn't really scream pick Perth players, does it? So when you look at them, so up until round 6, they go single game week, double game week, and then 3 singles after that. So, it's sort of a tough one, but you've got to look at their schedulizer from round 7 to 11, where they play 5 double game weeks in a row. So if you're looking at bringing in a guy like Bryce Cotton, I think realistically you've got to start him this season because he sits at 448,000. I think personally he's going to be a more efficient player this year in NBL25. He's just got so much more help around him. And you can obviously think, is it going to take some of his scoring away? Yes, it may, but it's only going to enhance his playmaking because we've seen Bryce Cotton have really, really high assist games in the NBL. So he could be a guy who averages, let's just say, 18 points and close to 8 assists. So he's going to be a double-double watch, and there's going to be games where he goes for 40. So he's going to be, a 40-point Supercoach scorer. So when I look at it, I think, okay, I'm going to look at a guy like Bryce as a 35 points per game player. So can I find a guy consistently who... Supercoach, yes. Maybe points as well in a game. You never know. But can I find a guy consistently who has a better schedule who's going to score more than 35 Supercoach points, maybe in a double game week? So, if you're looking at a guy like Jalen Adams, 100%, Milton Doyle, 100%, but you're paying the same sort of price as you are for Bryce anyways. So are you looking at a guy like Taron Armstrong? Yes, he may score 25 points, Supercoach points in one game and have 25 the next. So yes, you're going to lose out on 15 to 25 points there. But are you, saving yourself the cash, I guess, in the trade of obviously having Bryce in because you're going to have him for majority of the season because some of the ridiculous games that he can play in NBL Supercoach. But Jez, you got a question about Bryce?
Yeah. It's more like, okay, he's starting at this top price because they have this run, just looking at it now, where, it's 5 singles and 1 double in the first 6 rounds. Is there potential for someone maybe where you're like, okay, I've got a gun that I like, but I don't have maybe enough money to get Bryce, and you could look to then go, all right, maybe you take a top range mid player and expect Bryce's price to go down because of the lack of double game weeks before round 7?
But his price shouldn't go down though necessarily. So, so it obviously scales. So break evens are the biggest thing when we touch on with Supercoach and with AFL fantasy and fantasy games around the world. So your break even will adjust to how many games you're playing in that week. So let's just say Bryce's break even is 44 points for a single game week. If he hits that 44 points, he won't drop in cash for that week. Whereas if he has a double game week, his break even for the double game may be 80. So he's got to hit 80 over 2 games to be able to keep that cash. So necessarily, Bryce could be one of those guys who he's probably not going to make much more cash than what he is right now, but I don't see him dropping too much more either, because I definitely see him being a guy who is around that sort of 35 to sort of 40 points per game. And when we look at his break even to start the season, I'm just getting it up right now, his break even is only 37. So
Yeah,
it's not like it's a crazy break even where it's like, oh wow, he's going to really struggle early on in the season. They start the season against Southeast Melbourne Phoenix. Who's to say he doesn't have 50 Supercoach points in that first game? And for the rest of these single game weeks, his break even's quite low. So when you get him into that sort of 5 weeks in a row where they've got doubles, you've really got a prime player who is really hard to bring into teams for other teams as well. So, I just think realistically learning from last seasons when we're touching on those boosted trades, I wasted boosted trades in getting these sort of guys in. So if I've got a chance to start these guys and really have an overall strong team, I'm going to do that straight away. But Bryce is the first guy that I touch on. And the second one that I want to touch on has got a pretty good schedule in a sense to start the season. That's Adelaide 36's centre, Isaac Humphries. He starts the year as $329,800. But the only query I've got for Isaac is the fact that what's his role going to be this NBL season? We don't know what it is. If he was under Scott Ninez, he's probably a guy I'd look to start purely based on the fact that we know what he was last year. He was a double threat. He was having massive block games as well. He was just their number one option. But is he going to be the number one option under their new coach and under the new systems that they're producing over in Adelaide as well? I'm not 100% certain. So to be paying top dollar for a guy like Isaac is just not on my cards right now. But again, if he comes out in round 1 and even these preseason games as well and starts to dominate, it may be a little bit of a discussion that everyone starts to have with obviously Isaac Humphries in their team. Because the centre position, I think personally, is the weakest position in NBL Supercoach this year. But in a sense, though, it's also the position where you're going to be able to make a little bit of cash because there's obviously going to be some consistently good centres in the league. But Jez, have you got any thoughts on any of the other top prices before I announce a couple more that I'm looking at?
Yeah, I just think especially with Isaac Humphries, it could be definitely, I had him in my team and then took him out a couple of times, really. But I think he could be one of those sideways trades you do before the third game, I think, because you can see, okay, what's his role going to be? All right, I need to have him in because he's been scoring really well and he's obviously going to be, the center of the offense with DJ. Like it was at the back end of the season when Adelaide went on that big run. Obviously, that's what changed their season when he started to get more ball and became the center. So I think he could definitely well be one of these sideways trades you do at the start when you go, okay, well, this guy I picked isn't getting the time or getting the points, and then Humphries could definitely come in, or you can just forget about him for the rest of the season and forget about the Adelaide 36ers, really. So, which I'm sure you'd be happy about. You'd like it to go down that road. But, I think, some of these top guys, Taron Armstrong, I don't know, he was more of a mid-range player, I think, but he's going to be very, very interesting to see how he goes. Before we move on, I have him currently in my squad. I think he's going to see a lot of
as
ball
a starter or bench player.
As a bench player. So I think he can definitely do something. So, but these top ends, I think, you're looking at, say, maybe I don't know, it's more these mid-range players. I think for me, the Melbourne players and their schedule, they're the team to first have hit 5 games in the first 3 rounds. Is that correct?
Yep.
Yeah, they have that double game week. So I think they're really, really interesting because you're going to see that first probably huge, impactful price rise. So, I've had Melbourne players in and out, but it's also really, really hard to see, how's their team going to be now they have Jack White comes in, because he's going to obviously change the dynamic of that team and the scoring. So I had sort of Shea Illy in for a bit as well as a top range player, and then have taken him out right now, but he was in there this morning. So, I think it is really, really tough to find these top end players. And hearing your point of view about, okay, having a guy like Bryce and really checking out what their break even is compared to, it's obviously based around their average from last year. So as long as they're hitting that average, they should sort of sit at that price and maybe not drop. It's really interesting to go, okay, well, maybe you need some of these gun players in that you're just going to have, all right, forever. they're never gonna leave your team.
No, for sure. And the only thing with mid-range players, we'll get it out eventually, but if they've played in the NBL before, there's a reason why they are a mid-range player. So is it being dependent on role, or is it they're just not a great player, or what is the case? So when you look at these mid-range players, it's realistically, I guess, it's a tough one. Yeah, it's a little bit of a tongue twister, but it is about, I guess, finding the players with the right role, and then obviously finding the players who are going to have an increased sort of minute range as well. So I finally got that sentence there. That was very, very tough there as well. But a couple of other top prices to look at has to be Parker Jackson Cartwright. Now, he's the second most expensive player in the game. He sits at $421,000. But when you look at their schedule, they only play 2 games in the first 4 rounds because they head over to America to participate in the NBA preseason games. But as soon as they come back in, he's a target to look at after round 5. So if you start with a guy like Milton Doyle, Jalen Adams, one of those key guys who maybe aren't performing and are losing cash rapidly, a guy like Parker Jackson Cartwright might be the one to look to bring in after round 5 because they play 3 double game weeks after that. They then have 2 single game weeks, and then they play 4 double game weeks after that as well. So an incredible schedule there in which they only play, 2 weeks as only single game weeks. So it's he's one to definitely look at. The other one that I've looked at is obviously Xavier Cooks as well. It's hard to not look at him purely just because he was a former NBL MVP. He's worth $365,000. He's just an overall gun, to be honest with you. Trey Kell's another one. I know you guys have been very hot on him, $363,000. I was very hot on him, but again, I just don't know the role at the Illawarra Hawks because I get scared with Tyler Harvey being there. We've been such a dominant sort of point guard, shooting guard sort of player. And then obviously Will Magnay's another one at $317,000, in which is going to be a really, really underrated centre for the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers. Now, Jez, it's that time for us right now, and I'm going to start it off with you to announce our first teams that we've sort of, I guess, in the NBL Supercoach world before the preseason, the NBL Blitz does kick off. Can you start off with your starters, mate, and start off with your guards, forwards, and go to your bench and touch on what you've got on the bench as well, mate?
So, yeah, starting guards, I have Jalen Adams, and then I have DJ. Just say DJ because I can't say his name. Veselevich. How do you say it, Josh? Veselevich. Yeah, I got it. So they're my starting guards. It's definitely, like I said, with Adelaide 36ers, I think DJ is going to be the center, and he could be one of these guys that I do sort of trade out, looking at the schedule to maybe swap over to Pete, like Parker Jackson Cartwright when New Zealand come back from the States and you get that big run or that triple run of doubles from them. So he's definitely just sort of an interim player that I will start with and probably look to, or definitely will trade off after round 4. Then Cam Oliver could be a guy definitely that you just have in your team the whole time, I think, potentially. I'm just sort of having a quick look at their schedule now. They've always got, there's never more than 2 rounds where they go on where they're only playing a single game week. So if he is all you say he is, Josh, then he's definitely a guy that you could possibly have in your team, all the way. So then, go into, here's where I've sort of had a little bit of a tough time in these forwards. I've got Jack White at the moment because I think you need to have these Melbourne players at the start of the year, and he is at the moment the only Melbourne player that I do have in there. But like I said, that definitely can change. And then, I had Shea Ely instead of DJ at the start. So I don't know. It's and Jalen Adams, I've sort of swapped around with those guys. So see what happens once we get a little bit closer. But then I have Aldrich for Illawarra. I think he's definitely going to be a gun. And I think you're going to see him make a lot of money early. But it is like one of those tactics again where I'm just not quite sure of having these guys that don't have these perfect double game week runs at the start of the year. So he moves in. And then on the bench, I've got Kyron Galloway up in Cairns as my bench forward. I think he's going to play a much bigger role. He was sort of in the shadows last season, and then is now going to go up to Cairns and should play a little bit more of an influential role. So he's my starting bench forward. And then also a guy that I touched on earlier, Nick Marshall, because also Adelaide's good run at the start. And I think he'll make some good money early and then be able to upgrade from there. Then I have Rocco Zikarsky as my starting centre, sort of because of that sort of slow burner centre, really. And like you said, there's a little bit of a lack of depth maybe in the centre position. So he could be someone that's just in there, and I'll watch him sort of hit his peak in his price rises with single game weeks and then look to upgrade whenever that is. If he's not sort of earning it points or they come into their double game week patch, but I would presume he's going to sort of hit his max price probably a little bit later, around round 6 or 7 or something, and then you'll get off with him. But it's just sort of watching when that break even starts to get a little bit higher than his average. So then I have Taron Armstrong, like we said. I think going to be a key guy for Cairns and could be one of the top players. He could even be potentially one of the top players in Supercoach this year as a double threat, triple double threat, depending on how Cairns plays and how well they go. They are one of those teams as well that could be sort of mid-range or bottom end, a little bit like they were last year. So it'd be interesting to watch his projections, but definitely a good player to start with, I think, because he is on that lower end of mid-range and be able to upgrade once he gets to the top end of that mid-range with his price rises, and you should be able to pick up a gun from him fairly quickly. And then I have Elijah Pepper as my lowest priced player in my team to start with. I expect big things from Pepper, and so I think definitely he's a guy that probably most teams will have, because especially after his hot start to the preseason. But is hard to find that balance where how it's going to be with Henschel and who's going to be sort of that main guard coming off the bench for them. So, that's how it looks at the moment. But I think definitely it's probably going to look completely different by the start of the year, or probably at least half of those players you probably won't see by round 1. But that's how it looks at the moment. Josh, first I want to hear what's your yays and your nays personally from the team that I have just shared.
Yeah, I like them. I like a lot of them. The thing is, my biggest nay with your team currently is Dejan Vasiljevic personally. I just think, you look at their schedule, I'm just not sure what he's going to be able to produce for Adelaide. They play obviously, 6 games in the first 4 rounds, which is great. But then they've got a massive string of singles. I know you can obviously trade him out, but it's hard to really trade a guy like that out for another premium. It's sort of in a way wasting a trade for myself personally. And I think the biggest thing with Dejan Vasiljevic is, if he was an all-around solid player, I'd be all on it. But the fact that he can realistically go out there and drop 20 points one week and 5 points the next week, he doesn't really make up for it, I guess, in rebounds and assists. So that's probably one thing to have a bit of a think about over the next couple of weeks. And obviously look at it might be proven completely wrong. He might be a guy who goes out there this season, averages 25 and 5, and that's a great pick to start the season, and obviously be able to, trade him onto somebody else. In terms of your other players, I'm a massive fan of a lot of them. We've got some similar players for sure. Obviously, Zikarsky's the one that I've got questions about personally, and I've had them for quite some time. I'm just not sure, where the cash increases come from. I think it's like they play 10 games through the first 10 weeks, or 11 games for the first 10 weeks, whereas Melbourne and Sydney and all those other teams, they play about 15 or something around that. So you're potentially losing 4 to 5 games through that sort of, opening 10 weeks, which is a lot of time for not only just points, but money as well. So he's probably the only one that I'm not a fan of, but I'm going to get into my team because we have got some similar players. So you'll see pretty quickly who I like and who I don't like from your team, pretty much, or not necessarily who I don't like, who I just haven't chosen just yet. So I'm going to start off with the forwards for myself personally. So I've got Cam Oliver and Lachlan Aldrich as my 2 forwards. My centre is Melbourne United centre Marcus Lee. He had 12 points, 14 rebounds, and I believe 2 blocks in their opening preseason game. He looked really, really good as well. So if he's got that sort of role coming into NBL25, it's going to be quite impressive, I think, personally. And he's going to make some quick cash, especially being a 204K player. Then my two guards, I've gone big here. So I've gone Bryce Cotton and Jalen Adams to start the season. So Bryce is one of those guys who I'm going to be able to obviously captain in these opening round, in gather round, because all teams obviously play one game. I just think obviously that little bit of a patch there as well from rounds 7 to rounds 11 is really, really tempting for me. I just think I've got to get him in now before I potentially will not be able to have the trades to get him there, because there's always things popping up like injuries or form that just really derails your season, especially in these sort of things. So I've got to start with him, I think, personally. Now, my backup guards, I think I've gone identical to yourself. So I've gone Taron Armstrong as a backup point guard and Elijah Pepper as the other guard as well. So, like you probably mentioned there as well, Taron, it's more about, those statistics. It might be a guy who averages 15, 7, and 7. So that's going to be a massive increase on Supercoach points next season. And he's the number one guy for Cairns as well. And they've got a relatively good schedule to start the season. If you look at their first 5 games, the first 5 rounds. They play 6 games as well. So Melbourne, I think, is they play 7 games in their first 5 rounds. So they play 7 games with Melbourne and Sydney, and also the Adelaide 36ers as well through the first 5 rounds. So they're obviously the teams and the players that you want to be targeting going into these first opening rounds. My backup bench players on the forward position, I've got Ben Henschel, and I've got Akecha Lear as well. So another Melbourne United player who's going to play some great games early on. I just think as a $58,500 player and a centre sort of variety player, he averaged, I think it was 20 and 10 in the NBL1 competition over in South Australia. He's a guy who's going to be coming in with some good form, and he's going to make some quick cash, I think, personally, before the double round weeks to start the season. And now the last one that I want to touch on here, Jez, is a Tasmanian jack jumper, one of your boys, Gorjok Gak. Now, he's a guy who plays for my hometown team over here in WA. The Rockingham Flames in the NBL 1 season had an impressive season for them. Now, God forbid this does happen in the NBL world, but if Will Magnay does go down, I can't see another backup centre for the Tasmanian Jack Jumpers besides Gak. He played obviously a lot of backup minutes behind Alan Williams last season, and obviously had a pretty big impact as well. So a guy sitting at $157,000, I just think for what he can produce and the opportunity he is going to have to be able to produce that, that is the reason why I've started with him over a guy like Rocco Zakarski. And, you can even look at their schedule as well, like you mentioned before. They've got 2 single game weeks, followed by a double, followed by a single, followed by a double, followed by a single, and then 2 double game weeks after that. So, if we're looking at the round 7 mark, they're up there as well in terms of, most games played over a full NBL season so far. So that's where my sort of team sits. What are some of your thoughts on my team, mate? And maybe some players that you might be considering now, or that you're sort of like, why has he chosen that player?
Yeah, no, I don't know. I absolutely can't disagree with anything that you've put in. I think if there's someone that's thought the most about NBL Supercoach before this season, it's probably you. In our little group chats that we have, you've been on it, and all the loose bits of paper you have flying everywhere. So I think you're spot on. I'm here to take advice from you. I'm glad that we got to have a little bit of a insight into your team. So now I can just mirror that, so I get off to the best start. But yeah, man, the big key, I think, really is where you've thought maybe a little differently to me, is around those players like Gak and Bryce Cotton. From what I've taken out from your team, players that I think that you believe are going to have sort of a big impact, especially at the top end with Bryce, of having some players that are keepers right from the start, and you just sort of don't even worry about what the schedule is, because they're going to go big. So yeah, I don't know if I can take Bryce Cotton from the start, because he is so expensive, but it is going to be really, really interesting to see. Do you think you're going to change your team at all before the start of the season now, or are you locked and loaded?
I definitely think I won't change a Bryce Cotton or a Jalen Adams, but the bench guys, a massive chance of being changed. And even Lachlan Aldrich has been a starter for me. Is scaring me in some way as well. So, I haven't elected to go for Jack White, but that could definitely change as well, over these preseason games. I just haven't seen enough for him in these first 2 preseason games for Melbourne United to choose him. But yeah, it's this team has changed, I'd like to say under 100 times, but I think I'd be lying to you. So, yeah, there's going to be definitely some changes to end my team as well going into round one. But that's what makes it fun. You know, you sort of, like I said, I think that the biggest piece of advice I could give to yourself and everyone listening is go and write down 10 players in each position who you're looking at and put them into different categories. Put them into our top end, put them into our mid prices, and put them into our cash cow options. And then go and pick from there after the preseason games. So if you can come up with a pool of 30 players who you're looking at and 10 from each position, you're going to narrow them down to 4 forwards, 4 guards, and 2 centers by the time of the start of the season. So that's the only piece of advice I could give currently right now. But I'm looking forward to obviously continuing this sort of, I guess, chat and banter as well on the NBL Supercoach front. But that will wrap up today's episode. Now, before I wrap it up, Jez, have you got a couple of thoughts that you're obviously wanting to let the viewers know or the listeners know as well, maybe?
What, Supercoach wise, or what are we talking?
Supercoach wise, a bit of everything. What are we going to be doing? Sorry, I left that pretty open ended. But what are we going to be doing? I guess is the basketball fix for the rest of the season.
Yeah, well, I think obviously this has been our introduction show to the NBL Supercoach. I think coming up to the start of the season, we'll go through our teams again, especially right up before the opening round. So I think definitely we'll be having some more Supercoach content coming your way, and we'll definitely be putting all of this stuff up on our webpage at www.thebasketballfix, and just look for the category Supercoach, and we'll put up as much content if it's just directing you straight to these pods or putting up Josh's schedulizer, as he called it. That'll definitely be up there. And then any other information, we'll throw some screenshots and stuff up. Whatever questions, maybe you guys reach out to us on Instagram and on Facebook and let us know what sort of Supercoach content you want from us this season, not only on the pod, but also on our webpage, and we'll do our best to provide it for you. And then coming up with the Basketball Fix, there's going to be a heap more content written and spoken on all of our channels. We'll be pumping the content on our socials, and we'll be putting up different sort of articles through some of the great interviews that Josh will be doing throughout the season in his one-on-one segment on our pod. So look out for those. Look out for the articles coming up on our webpage, and definitely look out for Higgins Hot 3. That'll be coming in every week, where Josh will discuss whatever the biggest topics are in the league and be either jumping on and giving you his take or roasting some of the decisions that some people make. And he'll be coming in as hard as possible, giving one of those scary rants that he likes to do. So, the season launch is also there. We'll be doing a big season launch, obviously, around the time that the NBL Blitz is on, and heading into the big extravaganza that's coming up in Perth with round one and all the teams kicking off their season over in Josh's hometown. Hopefully he'll be there with his shirt off in the crowd, in the jungle himself as the wild boar. So, Josh will be there at Hoops Fest. So look for him getting his mug and his guts on TV. So, yeah. But
I'll admit,
that's
mate,
it.
You've done very well there.
Yeah, right. There's heaps coming on, as we can say, with that 5-minute rant about what is coming up with the Basketball Fix heading into the season. So super excited. 19 days left of day of recording while we're doing this. So heaps to look forward to, and heaps to happen between now and then. So it's all about just getting onto your channels and getting your Basketball Fix wherever you can.
And obviously make sure you go and check us out on Instagram as well, the Basketball Fix podcast. And one thing as well, if you've been excited, like we mentioned at the start of the show, to join our league, the Basketball Fix community, make sure you go into the league section, press join on the league. The code is 529777. So repeating that, 529777. So jump on there. It's free to enter. A bit of fun. We might see how we're going towards the back end of the season, and maybe put up a couple of small prizes there as well for some people to potentially win, and then obviously go on from there as well. But we're looking forward to obviously covering all of the NBL Supercoach stuff for you guys for the rest of the season. I'm looking forward to the banter and I guess the games versing Jeremy Darke on the rest of the season as well. And I'm looking forward to seeing how many times our teams have changed from this point right up until the start of the season as well, because this is where you start racking your brain when you get a spare 5 minutes to, a thought might come into your head and you go, oh, I've got to have a look at this player and see who I can fit this player in and who I can't fit in. It just gets super, super, I guess, draining, but also super, super fun as well. But that will wrap up today's episode. We're really thankful for having you guys on today. Like I've mentioned, make sure you check us out on social media, The Basketball Fix, and obviously check out our website as well, www.thebasketballfix.com. That is the end of today's episode, I should say, and we hope you've got your basketball fix.
Turnover at halfway. Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Clock at 10. Adams the off balance. Oh,